ॐ विश्वन्दर्पणदृश्यमाननगरी तुल्यन्निजान्तर्गतं पश्यन्नात्मनि मायया बहिर्मोद्भूतं यथा निद्रया यः साक्षात् कुरुते प्रबोधसमये स्वात्मानमेवाद्वयं तस्मै श्रीगुरुमूर्तये नम इदं श्रीदक्षिणामूर्तये नारायणं पद्मभुवं वसिष्ठं शक्तिं च तत्पुत्रपराशरं च व्यासं शुकं गौडपदं महान्तं गोविन्दयोगीन्द्रमथास्य शिष्यं श्रीशङ्कराचार्यमथास्य पद्मपादं च हस्तामलकं च शिष्यं तन्तोटकं वातिककारमन्यान् अस्मद्गुरून् सन्ततमानतोऽस्मि श्रुतिस्मृतिपुराणानाम् आलयं करुणालयं नमामि भगवत्पादं शङ्करं लोकशङ्करं शङ्करं शङ्कराचार्यं केशवं बादरायणं सूत्रभाष्यकृतौ वन्दे भगवन्तौ पुनः पुनः परब्रह्मनिष्ठं स्वतो धर्मनिष्ठम् अहिंसैकनिष्ठं स्वशिष्यै सुजुष्टं यतीनां वरिष्ठं गुरूणां गरिष्ठं दयानन्दरूपं मदाचार्यमीडे नमः श्रीपरमार्थाय संसाराध्यासनाशिने श्रोत्रियब्रह्मनिष्ठाय तस्मै ब्रह्मविदे नमः सदाशिवसमारम्भां शङ्कराचार्यमध्यमाम् अस्मदाचार्यपर्यन्तां वन्दे गुरुपरम्पराम् ॐ तपोभिः क्षीणपापानां शान्तानां वीतरागिणां मुमुक्षूणामपेक्ष्योऽयम् आत्मबोधो विधीयते. I welcome you all to the 22nd class of the Atma Bodha series. We will read verses 50 to 52 that we had covered in the last class and then proceed further. तीर्त्वा मोहार्णवं हत्वा
तीर्त्वा मोहार्णवं हत्वा
रागद्वेषादिराक्षसान्
रागद्वेषादिराक्षसान्
योगी शान्तिसमायुक्तः
योगी शान्तिसमायुक्तः
आत्मा रामो विराजते.
आत्मा रामो विराजते।
बाह्यानित्यसुखासक्तिम्
बाह्यान्नित्यसुखासक्तिम्
हित्वात्मसुखनिर्वृतः
हित्वात्मसुखनिर्वृतः
घटस्थदीपवत् स्वस्थः
घटस्थदीपवत् स्वस्थः
स्वान्तरेव प्रकाशते.
स्वान्तरेव प्रकाशते।
उपाधिस्थोऽपि तद्धर्मैः
उपाधिस्थोऽपि तद्धर्मैः
अलिप्तो व्योमवन्मुनिः
अलिप्तो व्योमवन्मुनिः
सर्वविन्मूढवत् तिष्ठेत्
सर्वविन्मूढवत् तिष्ठेत्
असक्तो वायुवच्चरेत्.
असक्तो वायुवच्चरेत्।
In these verses, Bhagavad is talking about Jnana Phalam, the benefit of this knowledge, which is Jivanmukti. And what does Jivanmukti involve? Bhagavad talked about a few different things. The first is Ajnana Nivrittihi, the removal of self-ignorance. And the second is Adhyasa Nivrittihi, the superimposition of the Jivatvam upon who I really am. And the third is Ahankara Mamakara Nivrittihi, the identification with the body and mind, based out of ignorance, arising out of ignorance, and also out of habit. Both of them have been taken care of. That is the Ahankara. And then through the body mind, the Jiva gets identified with some other Anatmas, my family, my possessions, my profession. When the Ahankara itself has been falsified, the Mamakara also gets falsified because it depends upon Ahankara. Only through the body mind identification can I get identified with other Anatmas in this world. So Ajnana Nivrittihi, Adhyasa Nivrittihi, and Ahankara Mamakara Nivrittihi. And then the fourth one, Bhagavad talked about was the total transformation in the vision of the Jivanmukta. As the Jiva, he took himself to be the limited mortal being in this separate world. But that is very much like the dream individual identified with that limited dream body in that separate dream world that he sees. The vision of an Ajnani Jiva is much like this dream individual. But when he awakens from that dream, his vision is radically altered. He sees that the whole dream world is in me. Similarly, the Jnani Jivanmukta's vision is diametrically opposite to that of the Ajnani. The Ajnani says, I am this puny creature in this immense world, under control of forces way beyond my control. I am the supported, the world is the supporter. But the Jnani Jivanmukta, who has awakened from this dream of samsara, he says that the entire world is in me as Brahman. As Brahman, I am the supporter, the world is the supported. And as we saw, he doesn't stop there with the supporter duality. Because what is supported is in a lower order of reality. The world is in a lower order of reality. I alone am in a higher order of reality as Brahman. I alone have substantial existence. The world doesn't have any substantial existence. It is only Namarupas. And therefore the world is my Namarupas. I alone am. This is the revolutionary vision of the Jnani Jivanmukta. And therefore he is liberated. In effect, he is unconditionally liberated. Because as Brahman, that is in the higher order of reality, he knows that I have no contact with any of the upadhis in a lower order of reality. And then Bhagavad talked about the similarity in the journey of the Jivanmukta with the story of Ramayana. And as we saw, Rama and Sita are inseparable, being wedded to each other. Now, the equivalent of Rama is Atma. The equivalent of Sita is the Purnatvam, the Shantihi, that is the very nature of Atma. So Rama and Sita are inseparable, and so are Atma and its very nature, that is the Shantihi Purnatva. But Rama loses Sita. Sita gets kidnapped. Similarly, this Jivatma has lost the Shantihi, lost this Purnatva. Why? Because of self-ignorance, because of not knowing who I really am. And just like Rama was wandering alone in the forest, anxious, worried, suffering, similarly this Jivatma is wandering in this forest of samsara, anxious, worried, and suffering as a samsari. Now, the first thing Rama had to do in order to gain back Sita was to find out where Sita really is. And similarly, this wandering Jivatma is wandering in the forest of samsara, has to get a direction to his search, has to get an orientation from his search. And this he gets from the Guru and Shastra alone. That the Shantihi, this Purnatvam that you're seeking, is your very nature. And therefore, once Rama had determined where Sita is, Rama had to cross the ocean to get to where Sita is. Similarly, this Jivatma also has to cross an ocean. Like we saw, Tirtva Moharnavam, this ocean of delusion, the Jivatma has to cross. And what is the delusion? That the Shantihi, this Purnatvam, can be obtained through the world. By pursuing the first three Purusharthas in the world, I can somehow attain the Shantihi, this Purnatvam. That is the ocean of delusion that this Jivatma has to cross. Now, Rama had to build this Setu in order to cross the ocean. So what is the equivalent of the Setu? We saw it is Nitya Vastu Vivekaha. Jivatma has to understand that the world has only got this Anitya Sukham to offer to me. And this Anitya Sukham can never give me that permanent peace, security, and happiness that I'm looking for. This is the Nitya Vastu Vivekaha. That is the equivalent of the Setu that leads me to where Shanti is, my own nature. Then, after having crossed the ocean with the help of the Setu, Rama still had to neutralize all the assistant Rakshasas. And similarly, even the Jivatma has to neutralize some Rakshasas. Ragat Dveshadi. He said, Ragat Dveshadi Rakshasan Hatva. So these Ragat Dvesha are the Rakshasas that are keeping me away from the Shantihi, this Purnatvam, because they are repeatedly drawing me into this world, to engage in the world. Therefore, the Raga Dveshas have to be neutralized through Karma Yoga. And Rama still had to neutralize other Rakshasas, like we saw Kumbhakarna and Indrajit. Kumbhakarna represents tamas, the inertia in the spiritual pursuit. We continue to do what we are doing, even though we may have known some additional things. We may just be so inert, so lazy to take up a new pursuit. Therefore, the tamas has to be neutralized. And then Indrajit, the son of Ravana. Ravana represents Rajas. So similarly, we have to neutralize the vikshepa of our mind also. Because even after the raga dveshas have been neutralized, tamas has been neutralized, the mind has this tendency to jump around. It is not one-pointed. And therefore, vikshepa has to be neutralized through upasana yoga. Now, once that is done, the main Rakshasa who now remains is Ravana. And Ravana, in the Vedantic world, stands for the Ajnanam and the Adhyasa. The heads of Ravana represent all the various adhyasas, the various misconceptions. Rama first tried to tried to uproot those heads. But then the heads kept coming back, because as long as the cause, as long as the root cause of those misconceptions, as long as the root cause of the adhyasa is not addressed, the root cause will, the symptoms will keep reappearing. So in Ravana's case, the root cause of the heads coming back up again and again was the elixir that was there in his Nabhi Desha or in his Hridayam, wherever that might be. So Rama had to attack that. And before that, he had to go to Agastya and get the Aditya Hridayam Upadesha and the Brahmastram that he would use to attack that elixir, which represents Ajnanam in our Vedantic domain. So the heads of Ravana, the Adhyasa, and the elixir represents the Ajnanam. Therefore, we cannot attack the Adhyasa directly. We have to attack the root cause, which is the Ajnanam. But the seeker cannot do it by himself. He has to get the Mahavakya Upadesha from the Guru and the Brahmastra in the form of the Aham Brahmasmi Vrittihi. The Aham Brahmasmi Vrittihi uproots the Ajnana. Sarvajnane Dhanam Dahet. This Jnanagni burns up all the Ajnanam. And when the Ajnanam is burnt up, the Adhyasas are also removed. And thus, Rama, having neutralized Ravana, got united with Sita. Similarly, the seeker who has now destroyed the Ajnanam and Adhyasa gets united with this Purnatvam, with this Shantihi, that is his own Swarupa, own nature. Then Rama continued to rule Ayodhya with Sita, and Ayodhya represents the kingdom that can never be assailed. Ayodhya can never be attacked. And when it can never be attacked, how can it ever be lost? So similarly, this Jīvanmukta, as the shloka says, Shanti Samayukta, Atma Ramo Virajate. So, united with this Shantihi, with this Purnatvam, that is his own nature, the yogi rules over this kingdom of Purnatvam that can never be attacked and can never be lost because it is his own nature. And then Bhagavad talked about the yogi reveling in his own nature. And here we talked about the two types of anandas. One is the Atmananda and the other is Vishayananda. The Vishayananda is nothing but the reflection of Atmananda in a conducive state of mind. When the mind is in a conducive state, the Atmananda is reflected in the mind in the form of experiential happiness. Now, when this reflected Ananda, this experiential happiness, arises from a conducive state of mind, that in turn arises because of a certain configuration of the world that is in keeping with my ragas and dveshas. Then it is called Vishayananda. It is a dependent Ananda because it depends upon the state of the world. If the state of the world is disturbed, the mind is no longer in a conducive state, and there goes the Vishayananda. So it is a dependent Ananda, and therefore it always comes and goes. Whereas Atmananda, being my own nature, my own fullness, limitlessness, completeness, never comes and goes. Therefore, the yogi, if the Vishayananda is there, due to prarabdha, Vishayananda can come into the yogi's life also. He can experience happiness in the world because of certain things, happiness in the mind because of certain things that take place in the world. Like Swamiji says that a sannyasi, for example, can get some good bhiksha all of a sudden. And that doesn't mean the sannyasi is going to turn away from it, saying that that I don't want to enjoy this Vishayananda. If he happens to get some bhiksha that he likes, that will result in this Vishayananda in his mind. And he enjoys that. But then the difference between an ajnani and a jnani is that the ajnani is addicted to this Vishayananda, whereas the jnani is not addicted to it. So the Vishayananda is not there. Then it doesn't cause any disturbance, any turmoil, any hankering, any craving in the mind of the jnani Jivanmukta. The jnani Jivanmukta is not dependent on this because he has this original source of happiness, which is this Atmananda. And in Nididhyasana, the jnani can invoke this knowledge. And when the jnani invokes this knowledge, then that Atmananda gets reflected in his mind. Because of the knowledge, the mind is in a conducive state that reflects the Atmananda, and then it becomes Vidyananda, the Ananda that is derived from this knowledge. So he can experience experiential Ananda in Nididhyasana, not because of the world, but because of the knowledge that he has. And therefore, such a jnani is not dependent upon this external world. Therefore, he says, Bahya nitya sukha saktim hitva. Hitva means he is not dependent upon the external sources of happiness. And ghatastha deepavat swastaha swantareva prakashate. In Nididhyasanam, he can invoke this knowledge and enjoy this Vidyananda. He is like a lamp that has been placed in a pot. That lamp just illumines the internals of the pot and is undisturbed, unflickering. So similarly, the jnani's mind doesn't have to run towards the world for any satisfaction. He discovers that satisfaction, contentment within himself. Svantareva prakashate. And then Bhagavad Pada says here that padhistha api tat dharmaihi aliptaha vyomavat munihi. We touched upon this, that even though he is in the upadhis, he is not affected by the attributes of the upadhis or the upadhis because he knows they are all in a lower order of reality. Therefore, this jnani is compared to space that is totally unattached. Everything, it accommodates everything, but nothing can affect the space. Therefore, Vyomavat Muni. And this Jnani Jivanmukta can be there amidst all the Ajnanis. Now, the difference between the Jnani and the Ajnanis is just internal. Jnani has this knowledge, whereas the Ajnanis don't. And therefore, he can even appear to merge amidst the Ajnanis. As he says here, Sarvavin Mudhavat Tishthet. Sarvavit, even though he is a knower of Brahman, we will see today that when one knows Brahman, one has effectively known whatever is there that needs to be known. Therefore, he is called Sarvavit. He is a Sarvavit. But Mudhavat Tishthet, meaning he just merges amongst the Ajnanis. And just by looking at the external appearances, you can't even make out that amongst these Ajnanis, there is a Jnani there also. The difference is not external, the difference is purely internal. And as we saw, Krishna also warns that amongst the Ajnanis who are not ready, na buddhi bhedan janaye, that the Jnani is instructed by Krishna to not confuse the Ajnanis who are not ready to receive this knowledge. And therefore, if the Ajnanis are engaging in karmas, the Jnani may just go ahead and encourage them to do those karmas, and may also himself engage in those karmas also. So externally, there may appear to be no difference at all. But Internally, there is this very big difference. And vayuvaccharet, asaktaha, vayuvaccharet. The Jnani Jivanmukta being totally unattached to any form, any external anath, he can move about in this world like the wind. So vayuvaccharet. So this doesn't mean that a Jnani has to necessarily keep moving about. That a Jnani, so we should not judge that if somebody is stationary in one place, then that person is not a jnani. It is not like that. The only condition for being a jnani is that the person should have this jnanam. The other things are more like indicators, which are not compulsory indicators. And therefore, even though the jnani may be stationary in one place, the internal state of mind is like Vayu, who is unattached to everything external. So that is the message we should take from this. And go to the next shloka. Upadhi vilayad Vishnau
उपाधि विलयाद् विष्णौ
nirvishesham vishen munihi
निर्विशेषं विशेन् मुनिः
jale jalam viyat vyomni
जले जलं वियद् व्योम्नि
tejas tejasi va yatha.
तेजस्तेजसि वा यथा.
So far, Bhagavad had talked about this jnana phalam, the benefit of knowledge, which is Jīvanmukti. So the jnani Jīvanmukta is liberated even when living. Jivan eva muktihi, Jīvanmukti. It is the prarabdha that keeps the jnani's body alive. And the prarabdha also affects the jnani's body and mind. But the jnani knows that being this Atma that belongs to a higher order of reality, I am not affected by this prarabdha at all. The body and mind may be affected, but I am asangaha, I am unaffected. Now, here Bhagavad is discussing the fall of the jnani's body. When the prarabdha ends, the jnani's body has to fall, just like an ajnani's body falls upon the end of prarabdha. So now, this fall of the jnani Jivanmukta's body is called Videhamukti. Videhamukti. Here, in this context, we should recall the three karmas associated with the jiva, as we saw in Atma Bodha. First is the Sanchita karma. The Sanchita karma is the sum total of all the karmas associated with the jiva because of all the actions done by the jiva in the countless past janmas. So this can include punya and papa both in the Sanchita karma. Then from that bundle of Sanchita karma, a small subset of it, which we call prarabdha karma, is responsible for the production of the present body of the jnani Jivanmukta. Or for any jiva for that matter. The prarabdha produces the present body. And during the course of this life, by living this life, the prarabdha gets exhausted. But during that life, that jiva gains additional karmas, does additional actions, and therefore gains additional punya and papa, and this is called agami karma. So now, when it's time for the body to fall, whether it be for an ajnani or a jnani, that happens when the prarabdha is exhausted. When the prarabdha is exhausted, then what happens next is the question. Now, for an ajnani, the sanchita karma and the agami karma are there. So the agami, some of the agami karma that the ajnani gains, that is exhausted in the same life. And some of it, the remaining part of it, joins the sanchita. So even though prarabdha gets exhausted and the body falls, the sanchita karma is still there. And from that, a subset of the prarabdha is taken out, and that determines the next janma of the ajnani jiva. But in the jnani's case, the sanchita has been burnt. Jnanagni sarvakarmani dahati, as Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita. Hey Arjuna, Jnanagni sarvakarmani dahet. So it burns away all the karmas. And therefore sanchita is destroyed. And prarabdha is also exhausted for this jnani. And agami is avoided. The agami is accumulated only for somebody who takes himself to be the karta. The jnani knows I am not the karta at all, therefore this agami karma is avoided. So sanchita is destroyed, prarabdha is exhausted, agami is avoided. Therefore, during the fall of the body, there is no further karma left for this jnani. So just like prarabdha is the fuel for this sthula sharira, the sanchita and agami can be taken to be the fuel that propel the sukshma and karana shariras. When prarabdha, the fuel is exhausted, the sthula sharira falls. But for a jnani, there is no sanchita, no agami, and therefore there is no fuel left to sustain the sukshma and karana shariras. Therefore, all of the upadhis get disintegrated. Therefore, he said, upadhi vilayat. These upadhis are disintegrated. Therefore, what happens? He says, vishet. Vishet means he merges, he enters, he becomes one with. Vishet. Who? Who enters? Who merges? He says, munihi. So we see this upadhi vilayat Vishnu nirvishesham vishen munihi. So if we were to split that, it becomes vishet munihi. So the munihi, this Jīvanmukta jnani, vishet. Vishet means enters, merges into, becomes one with. The question is, how? In what manner does he enter or merge? He says, nirvishesham vishet. Nirvishesham vishet means indistinguishably, without a trace, without any boundary, he merges. Because he has dropped all the upadhis. Sthula, Sukshma, Karana Shariras, all the upadhis have been dropped. Therefore, there is nothing left to distinguish. So, indistinguishably he merges. So into what does he merge? You said, Munihi nirvishesham vishet. He merges indistinguishably. Into what does he merge? He says, Vishnu. Vishnu. Into Vishnu. So in this context, Vishnu refers to Sarvam Veveshti Vyapnoti iti Vishnu. Sarvam Veveshti Vyapnoti iti Vishnu, meaning the one who pervades everything. Therefore, in this context, the word Vishnu refers to Brahman. Therefore, the Jivanmukta jnani indistinguishably merges into Brahman. And how? What causes this merger? It says, as we saw, upadhi vilayat. Upadhi vilayat means all of these upadhis have been dropped. So we take the example of the pot space merging into the total space. So when the pot breaks, we say that pot space merges into the total space. But if we really closely examine this, we find that the space was not really divided even in the beginning, was not really separated. And we have seen this before, that even the walls of the pot, are in space. And therefore, the pot never really separates the pot space from the total space. The pot space only appears to be separated from the total space because of the upadhi of the pot. That is what is called an upadhi, as we saw. It is something that distinguishes through a seeming transfer of attribute. That's what we call an upadhi. And therefore, this pot space was never really separate from the total space to begin with. But the pot appears to make it separate. So when the pot breaks, what happens? The as though separation is as though removed through the as though merger. The as though separation is as though removed through the as though merger. There is no real merger taking place. So similarly, the Jnani, we say, merges with Brahman. But even before the fall of the body, there was consciousness enclosed in this body, and there's total consciousness. So the consciousness that is enclosed in the body is not really separated from the total consciousness. It is only as though separated by this body. And therefore, the as though separation of the enclosed consciousness, because of the upadhi of the body mind, because of the upadhis of the three shariras, the as though separation is as though removed with an as though merger upon the fall of the upadhis. So earlier there was a seeming separation, now even the seeming separation is not there. The Jnani Jīvanmukta has become one with Brahman, and even the seeming separation is not there, as though become one with Brahman. So now the upadhis, if you look at the upadhis, he says upadhi vilaya. The upadhis disintegrate, then what happens to the disintegrated upadhis? We say the sthula shariram disintegrates and merges with the sthula prapancha. The sukshma shariram disintegrates and merges with the sukshma prapancha. The karana shariram disintegrates and merges with the karana prapancha. Then there can be a question that what happens to the reflected consciousness? The Jivatma, as we said, is the upadhi, the shariratrayam, plus the reflected consciousness, plus the original consciousness. So we talked about what happens to the original consciousness, as though merges with Brahman. We talked about what happens to the shariratrayam, what happens to the reflected consciousness. We say that the reflected consciousness in the sthula shariram, because the sthula shariram disintegrates, the reflected consciousness in the sthula shariram merges with the reflected consciousness in the sthula prapancha. So this Vishwa, that is the reflected consciousness in the sthula shariram, merges with Virat, that is the reflected consciousness in the sthula prapancha. Taijasa, that is the reflected consciousness in the Sukshma Shariram, merges with Hiranya Garbha, that is the reflected consciousness in the Sukshma Prapancha. And Prajnaha, who is the reflected consciousness in the Karana Sharinam, merges with Ishvaraha or Antaryami, that is a reflected consciousness in the Karana Prapancha. Therefore, Upadhi Vilayat. These Upadhis get disintegrated and merge into the corresponding Prapancha, and the reflected consciousness is each of these Upadhis, they also merge with the reflected consciousness in the Samashti Prapancha. And then Bhagavad gives the examples. He gives 3 examples here. Yatha jale jalam viyat vyomni tejas tejasiva. So just like water merges into water. So we can take the example of a river merging into the ocean. The river water approaches the ocean. Even as the river water approaches the ocean, you can see that this is the water of the river, this is the water of the ocean. But once the river water enters the ocean, you cannot say where the river water ends and where the ocean begins. You cannot draw any boundary indicating that this water came from the river and this water belongs to the ocean. It becomes indistinguishably one. Therefore, yatha jale yatha jale jalam nirvishesham vishet. The second example is viyat vyomnihi, which is the example of the pot space. Vyat means space. Vyoma, vyoman. It's a nakaranta shabda. Vyoman shabda. That's why vyomni is the saptami of it. So vyat vyomni, just like space merges into space. So here again it's the pot space merging into total space. Once the pot is broken, then we cannot draw any boundary saying that this is where the pot space ends and this is where the total space begins. Indistinguishably merged. And similarly, tejas, tejasiva, or light merging into light. For example, we can imagine 2 candles being placed next to each other in a dark room. Now there is light from this first candle and light from the second candle. Even near the candles, you can say this is the light from the first candle. Here you can say this is the light from the second candle. But if you take somewhere in between, let us say there is an object being illuminated that's placed in the middle. Now you can't say here that this light is from the first candle, this light is from the second candle. You cannot draw any boundary there. Indistinguishably merged. So similarly, the Jivatma becomes one with the Paramatma in Videhamukti. So once, as we saw, this is a figurative merger, and as though merger, there is no motion involved in this merger. And once this as though merger happens, there cannot be any boundary saying this consciousness belongs to this Jivatma who has now attained Videhamukti. Indistinguishably merged. Now here there is a slight, if you look at the examples, then in the Jale Jalam, there is motion involved in the merger. Some motion involved in the merger. And even in Tejas, Tejasi, if you look into the physics of it, you can say that the physicist would say that the light has traveled from here and both of these lights are merged at this point. So there is some motion involved in the merger, you can say. So compared to those two, we say that the Vyat Vyomni is a much more similar example to the Jīvanmukta as though merging with Brahman during Videhamukti, because there is no motion involved at all. In the pot space merging into the total space, it is a very pure example of an as though merger, where there is no motion involved at all. So we say that the situation in case of the Jivatma merging with Paramatma is very close to this example. We'll go to the next words. Yallabhan paro labha.
Yallabhan na paro labha.
Yat sukhanna param sukham.
Yet sukhanna param sukham.
Yat jnananna parang jnanam.
Yet jnanam na param jnanam.
Tad brahmetyavadharayet.
Tat brahmetyavadharayet.
So, till now, Bhagavad has now discussed Jivanmukti as well as Videhamukti. The benefits of Jnanam, the Jnana Phalam in the form of Jivanmukti as well as Videhamukti. So now here Bhagavad is talking about this Jnana Mahima, Brahma Mahima, Moksha Mahima, the glory of Brahman, glory of Moksha, glory of this Jnanam. Why? Why is Bhagavad talking about the glory of these? In order to inspire, in order to encourage the seekers to take up this pursuit seriously. For example, people produce all of these marketing brochures, etc. So there is all these brochures that promote tourism. And only when one sees that, okay, somebody there mentions, you should go and see the Mona Lisa, for example. It is the greatest painting in this world. So they put all these kinds of words in there. And looking at it, this jiva, this person who is a potential tourist is there, but looking at the brochure converts him into an actual tourist who takes the trouble to go there and see what is really there. It invokes a certain curiosity in the person also. The only difference is that a lot of the hype that is created in those marketing brochures, what it is, it is hype. Whereas here the hyperbolic words that are used, they are not really hype. They are the actual truth about Brahman, about moksha, about this jnana. That is the difference. So Bhagavad is in some ways encouraging us by using some hyperbolic words, but it so happens that those hyperbolic words are the truths. And therefore we will see what Bhagavad says here. So he says avadharayet. So in the last word in the last quarter of this verse, avadharayet. Avadharayet means vijaniyat. It means may you know. May you know. May you know what? Tat Brahma iti. Tat Brahmetyavadharayet. If you split that, it becomes Tat Brahma iti avadharayet. May you know that as Brahman. Bhagavad says. So what? May I know what as Brahman? So he says, Yat labhat na aparaha labhaha. The first quarter of this verse. Yallabhan na paro labhaha. If we split that, it becomes Yat labhat na aparaha labhaha. So compared to whose gain, there is no greater gain or no other gain. What it means. Compared to which gain, there is no greater gain, no other gain. So there are two interpretations here possible for this. This is why we say no greater gain, no other gain. This happens because the word aparaha is used. Yallabhat na aparaha labhaha. So he says na aparaha labhaha. So the word aparaha has two possible meanings. One is nasti paraha yasmat. Nasti paraha yasmat, meaning that for which there is nothing greater. That can be called aparaha, meaning the greatest, which can be called aparaha. That is one meaning. The other meaning is another or other. That can also be called aparaha. And therefore, when he says, Bhagavad says, Yat labhat na aparaha labhaha, it can have two possible meanings. Compared to whose gain, there is no greater gain. That is one possible meaning. Or the other is compared to whose gain or compared to which gain, there is no other gain. So we will look at both of these meanings. The first meaning is Yat labha na aparaha labha. So compared to the gain of which, that is the gain of Brahman or the gain of moksha, compared to the gain of which there is no greater gain. Why do we say? So here, in this case, in this interpretation, we are accepting that there are other gains also. There are other gains also, and compared to those gains, this gain of moksha, gain of Brahman, is the greatest. There is no greater gain. What are the other gains? We say that's the gain of arthaha, kamaha, dharmaha. So we acknowledge that those purusharthas, so they are also purushartha. Arthaha, kamaha, dharmaha are purushartha, and moksha is also a purushartha. Artha, kama, dharma are gain, and moksha is also a gain. But amongst them, moksha has the greatest gain. That is what we are saying here. Because we acknowledge that artha, kama, and dharma also give some peace, security, and happiness. We don't deny that in this interpretation. But moksha alone is the greatest because it is permanent peace, security, and happiness. The others are not permanent. That is the main difference. So we may say that, okay, I understand artha and kama are temporary. But what about dharma? We have seen this before. That dharma, when we take dharma, the meaning as punya, then no punya is also permanent. The punya that is gained brings about its conducive situation in life, which may be future arthaha or kamaha, it may be arthaha kamaha, or it may be swargaha, whatever it is. Once that conducive situation is given by the punya also gets exhausted. So all of these arthaha, kamaha, and dharmaha, they are not permanent. Shine punye martyalokam vishanti, as we have seen. When the punya is exhausted, it may have taken one to Swarga also, but that Swargaloka stay will also end. There is no permanent residency in Swarga. All of this rules that Trump is now trying to bring in. Swarga had much stricter rules even before. In US, there is permanent residence, okay, but in Swarga, there is no permanent residency. Okay, so this is the first interpretation where we accept the artha, kama, and dharma as purusharthas and say that the difference is in degree, not in kind. So they are all purusharthas, but moksha is of a much higher degree. It is the greatest. These are great. Artha, kama are great. Dharma is greater, but the moksha is the greatest. But then we come to the second interpretation, where aparaha means other. So yat labhat na aparaha labhaha means compared to which there is no other gain. So compared to moksha, other things cannot be compared gains at all in this. So the difference is not in degree, but the difference is in kind. That's what we are saying here. So it is not that moksha is the greatest amongst the four purusharthas of artha, kamaha, dharmaha, and moksha. We are saying that moksha is, in this case, it is the only purushartha. It is the only accomplishment, really speaking. The others cannot even be considered accomplishments, cannot even be considered purusharthas. So why do we say so? Because of three reasons. The first is that the other accomplishments, the artha, kama, and dharma, they are all accomplishments of mithya. And since they are accomplishments of mithya, they are not real accomplishments at all. That is the first reason. So they cannot be considered a real gain at all. For example, if in my dream I hit a jackpot of a lottery, let us say, something like 100 crore lottery, right? Then that is the first example. The second example is you may say, oh, that's a dream. How can you compare it to a dream, etc.? So the second, let us say that somebody gives you a bundle of cash, but it's all counterfeit notes. Right? So let us take either example now that you have hit a jackpot in your dream, or you have now got this bundle of notes, but they are all counterfeit. So now neither of these can be considered a real gain at all because you cannot practically use it for anything at all. It cannot really be used to buy anything. You think that you have gained something, but really speaking, you have not gained anything at all. So artha, kama, and dharma are likened to this situation. So the first is that it is really all accomplishment of mithya, accomplishment of something that is not real. Now the second reason is that something can be called an accomplishment if you can enjoy that in some manner. Let's say you're enjoying something, right? Now what happens with all of the artha, kama, and dharma gains is that they are all finite. And since they are finite, this jiva has already got this conclusion that I am a purna. So apurna plus anything finite, finite plus finite always remains finite. And the jiva continues to be apurna. Therefore, the jiva continues to compulsively engage in the world, saying that I am apurnaha, I will become purnaha through this pursuit of artha, kama, and dharma. So he is running on a treadmill, as we have seen. He continues to run on this treadmill. He is not reaching anywhere. He continues to stay in the same place. He continues to be apurnaha, but he is constantly running. Now, is this really giving him enjoyment, all these accomplishments? See, we look at it. If one is engaged in hectic activity, let's say somebody is engaged in hectic activity. Now, if all that activity is arising out of purnatvam, like in case of a Jnani Jivanmukta can be very active. Like Bhagavad traveled the length and breadth of the country. But he was not doing it for Purnatva. He was doing it out of Purnatva. So there's a big difference between activity that one engages in for the sake of Purnatvam versus activity that arises out of Purnatva. Now, in case of the Ajnani, he is compulsively engaging in artha, kama, and dharma for the sake of Purnatva, which is always elusive and therefore he is continuing to run on this treadmill. So when he is doing it for the sake of Purnatvam, then it causes helplessness, anger, frustration, depression. And then he has to go to stress reduction seminars. He is stressed and strained after all this running, and therefore he lands up in stress busting seminars or stress reduction seminars, etc. So all of this proves that he is getting stressed in this process. He is getting strained in this process. He is not really enjoying this process. And therefore, again, all of these cannot be really called gains at all. Yat labhat na aparaha labha. Then the third reason is that we can call something an accomplishment if it makes a significant difference. But he is continuously taking himself to be apurnaha. He is constantly running on this treadmill. It has not made any difference to his status of apurnatvam at all. And therefore, we say that even if one gains Indra's position, right, through arthaha, kamaha, and dharma, through dharma, one gains Indra's position, for example. One goes to Swargaloka not as a citizen, but as a very president of Swargaloka, Indra. But our Puranas tell us that even Indra is an insecure person. The moment Indra sees that somebody is doing some great tapas, now Indra is concerned about his own position, because if this person performs so much tapas, then he could gain enough punyam to become the next Indra. Therefore, Indra is insecure. Or if somebody is doing the 100th Ashwamedha Yaga, now after doing the 100th Ashwamedha Yaga, one can gain Indra's position. Therefore, Indra tries to create all kinds of disturbances in these situations. Even Indra is insecure. And therefore, all these accomplishments can never lead one to this Purnatvam. They always keep one in samsara. Therefore, how can they really be called gains? If there is a certain disease, right, and a doctor gives a certain medicine, if one consumes the medicine and gets cured of the disease, then only it can be called a real medicine. If he has to take this medicine and it is making no difference in the disease and is continuing to consume that thing that he thinks is the medicine, it cannot even be called a medicine at all. Therefore, artha, kama, and dharma gains cannot be called gains at all. Therefore, the struggle for Purnatvam ends only with moksha. Moksha alone is the real accomplishment. The others are not worth calling accomplishments at all. Yat labhat na aparaha labhat. Then yat sukhat na aparam sukham. So again here, he says that compared to which sukham, compared to the ananda, there is no greater ananda. That is one interpretation. Or compared to which ananda, there is no other ananda. There are two possible interpretations here again. So compared to every other sukham, right, mokshananda is the greatest. We acknowledge that the others are also sukham. But this is the greatest sukham. Yat sukhat na aparam sukham. So here we say that all the other sukhams, they are there. But they are all mixed with these three doshas. Dukkha mishritatvam, atriptikaratvam, bandhakatvam. In every other sukham, there is dukkha. Dukkha in trying to accomplish that. Dukkha in the maintenance of that sukham. And every sukham is anityaha, and therefore there will be dukkham when that sukham departs. Dukkha mishritatvam. Atriptikaratvam, every other sukham leaves me unfulfilled. And bandhakatvam, every other sukham leaves me dependent upon the world, which is inherently unpredictable, uncontrollable, unsustainable. So, okay, there is some sukham, the others of sukham, the sukham arising of artha, kamaha and dharmaha, they are also sukha. They can be called sukham, but moksha sukham is the greatest of them. This is the first interpretation. There is a second interpretation also, as we saw in the other case. Yat sukhat na aparam sukham, that other than Atma sukham, there is no other sukham. Why? Because what you're calling sukham is not really that at all, not really there independently at all. It is only a reflection of that Atma Sukham. Every experienced Ananda is only a reflection of the Atmananda. If I see a reflected face in the mirror, then that reflected face in the mirror cannot be called a separate face. It is only a reflection of the original face. Really speaking, only the original face is there. Other than this original face, there is no other face. Similarly, compared to Atmananda, there is no other Ananda. Every Ananda is really a reflection of Atmananda. So, as we have seen this, if we take this to be separate, if we take the objects of the world to be giving us Ananda, then that is really a misconception. And we have seen this example of a dog chewing on a bone. When the dog chews on the bone, that bone is lacerating the dog's mouth. And then that causes bleeding, micro bleeds in the dog's mouth. And the dog sucks its own blood, thinking that blood, the taste of the blood is coming from the bone. And in fact, the taste of the blood is the dog's own blood. The bone is actually tasteless. So similarly, when objects of the world put the mind in a conducive state, and in that conducive state of the mind, there is the reflection of Atmananda. But the Ajnani takes this reflection of Atmananda in the conducive state of mind, takes the source of it to be the object. So we say that he is making the same mistake that the dog makes. There is really no other Ananda. Yat sukhat na aparam sukham. And yet jnanat na aparam jnanam. Compared to which knowledge there is, compared to the knowledge of which there is no greater knowledge. This is the first interpretation. There is no greater knowledge. And this is why we call Atma Vidya or Brahma Vidya as Para Vidya. And everything else is called Apara Vidya. Because every other knowledge keeps the limited pramata intact, keeps the limited knower intact. Every other form of knowledge, as we have seen, it is like an island. It is like an island. The body of the island represents that knowledge, and the shoreline of that island represents the ignorance. So, with every other knowledge, one may answer a few questions, but it raises more questions. And therefore, the body of the island, the mass of the island may grow. But when the mass of the island grows, its shoreline also grows. So all these material sciences and everything, they are like this island whose body is growing. They're answering a lot of questions about the world, but with every answered question, there are 5 unanswered questions that emerge. That is why in the PhD thesis, there is always this future work section at the end that says that I have answered so many questions. We know about this, but now we don't know about this. We don't know about this. He lists 5 or 10 other things. That then other 5 or 10 other next graduate students, they come in and they work on those questions. And then they discover 5 or 10 more questions. So this is how all of these other knowledge goes. And therefore, they always keep the Apurna Pramata intact. But Brahmajnanam, is the greatest amongst these because, as we will see, it is the knowledge knowing which everything is as well known. Then the second interpretation here is that other than Brahma Jnanam, there is no other Jnanam at all. The other things are not really worth calling Jnanam at all. Why? Because they are all Jnanam about Mithya. They are all Jnanam about Mithya which doesn't really exist. So in some sense, they are all like, in some ways, knowing the rope as a snake. They cannot be called Jnanam at all because when you know something else, which is the Adhishthanam, when you know the Adhishthanam, then the reality of this knowledge gets contradicted. When you know the rope, then you know that what I knew as a snake was unreal. Similarly, here as well, one can, for example, one may solve a lot of puzzles. If one is having a dream, right? Then the dream, one may be able to solve a lot of puzzles. So he's continuing to solve all those puzzles, but he is unaware that he's in a dream. So only the awakening from the dream can be called real knowledge. Because that puts everything else into perspective. Otherwise, one can continue to solve puzzles after puzzles in the dream, not knowing that he is in a dream. So that cannot be called real knowledge at all. Brahmajnanam alone is a knowledge of Satyam. Everything else is knowledge of Mithya only. And moreover, there cannot be any finality in knowledge with regards to any Mithya. This is Vedanta's assertion. Because any Mithya is a product of Maya. Any other knowledge is probing into Maya. And the more you probe into Maya, the more mysterious it becomes. You cannot have any finality of knowledge with regards to any Mithya Vastu because it is Mayikam. And therefore, whatever you know about Maya, that can never have any finality and therefore it cannot be called knowledge at all. For example, even all these quantum physicists, they started off with the assumption that everything is particles. But the deeper they probed into it, now they cannot tell whether what is there is a particle or a wave. There is no conclusion on that. And they are saying that there cannot be any conclusion at all, and therefore they have come up with this particle wave duality, etc. Because they cannot say with certainty what it is. If there can be certainty of knowledge, then there can be certainty only in the knowledge of Brahman. Therefore, that alone can be called knowledge. Nothing else can be called knowledge. Yat jnanat na aparam jnanam. Therefore, having said all this, compared to which there is no greater gain or no other gain, compared to which there is no greater sukham or no other sukham, compared to which there is no greater knowledge, compared to which knowledge there is no greater knowledge or no other knowledge. Know that to be Brahman, Bhagavad says. Tad Brahma iti avadharayet. You know that to be Brahman. And then Bhagavad continues on a similar theme in the next verse. We will read that. Yad drishtva na param drishyam.
Yad drishtva na param drishyam.
Yad bhutva na punarbhavaha.
Yad bhutva na punarbhavaha.
Yad jnatva na paranyeyam.
Yad jnatva na param jneyam.
Tad brahmetyavadharayet.
Tad brahmetyavadharayet.
So yad drishtva na aparam drishyam. So again, there are two possible interpretations here. Compared to which there is no greater thing to be seen. So compared to which Brahman, there is no greater thing to be seen. So having seen Brahman, there is nothing more glorious to be seen because one has seen the limitless Brahman. One has known the limitless Brahman. Everything else is limited. Or other than Brahman, other than which Brahman, there is nothing else to be seen. Because there is no second thing other than Brahman, really speaking. Everything else is only Namarupas of Brahman. The only substantial thing that really exists is Brahman alone. Just like saying that there is no pot other than the clay. There is no pot to be seen other than the clay. Similarly, there is nothing else to be seen other than Brahman because there is no second thing, really speaking, other than Brahman. And yad bhutva na punarbhava. Yad bhutva na punarbhava. So the structure of this is a little different. Meaning, having become which, there is no other, there is no further becoming. It is not like the other quarters. This is a little different. Yad bhutva na punarbhava. Having become which, there is no other becoming. So as we have seen, that this apurnaha jivaha is constantly becoming something or the other in this world. Because he cannot be satisfied knowing that I am apurnaha. He has to do something about it. And therefore, he is constantly becoming something or the other in this world. Constantly running on this treadmill. So he is initially, for example, the child I, right? So the way he becomes something, he is really bringing about some changes in the world. He is rearranging the world according to his raga dveshas. Why? Because he wants to become Purna. So there's this child I who wants to become a high school graduate I. But then he still finds himself to be a Purna. And therefore the high school graduate I now wants to become a college graduate I. But still finds himself to be a Purnaha. And the college graduate I then wants to become an employed I. Now I hear that there are a lot of college graduates in the US who are having difficulty finding jobs. So there is a lot of stress and strain that they are going through now. College graduate I is now trying to become an employed I. But then the employed I, he cannot sit still because he wants to become a house owner I. And that house owner I, then he wants to become, he's a bachelor I, so he wants to become a married I. And then a married I wants to become a father I or a mother I. And then that father I or mother I wants to become a father-in-law I or a mother-in-law I. And then that father-in-law I or mother-in-law I wants to become a grandparent I. So this continues, this becoming continues. There is no end to it. And one may think that death brings an end to it. But we say that the apurnaha jiva remains. As long as the apurnaha jiva remains, there is punarjanma. That is also punarbhava. And the next janma, he finds himself to be apurna again. And then starts the child I, and then high school graduate I, college graduate I. That cycle continues. Even death does not bring an end to this becoming. This becoming endlessly continues. How long? Until one comes to the understanding that what I have been doing is not really working. One comes to nitya vastu vivekaha, ihamutrartha phalabhoga viragaha. Until one gains the qualifications and there's parikshalokan karmachitan brahmanaha nirvedamayat nasti akrita kritena tat vijnanartham sa gurumeva abhigacche. Until one gains these qualifications, until one comes to this understanding that the Apurnaha I plus any number of accomplishments is finite plus finite. I'm just decorating the broomstick. Broomstick remains a broomstick. This Apurnaha I with any number of accomplishments remains an Apurnaha I. And therefore, I have to do something very different from what I have done before. I have to question the very conclusion that I have that I am Apurnaha. That is the only way to gain this Purnatva. And therefore he comes to Vedanta, and having discovered that I am Brahman, that is ever Purnaha, full, limitless and complete, then he doesn't have to seek Purnatvam from this world. And therefore it brings an end to all of this becoming. And Swamiji gives an example here, which Swamiji talks about this making of a puri. So if you see that there is this oil in the frying pan, there's this oil that is boiling. So in that, the moment you put this flat puri inside it, the flat puri runs around everywhere. It just keeps running around that in the boiling oil. And then finally it becomes bloated. When it bloated, it just stands still wherever it is. So the Swamiji says that remember this puri example. It should remind you of this running around and becoming still when one is purnaha. Yad gyatva na aparam geyam. So having known which, there is nothing else remaining to be known. So here the reference is to of some of the Upanishads, and especially the Chandogya Upanishad. In the Chandogya Upanishad, there is a student called Shvetaketu who is sent to the Gurukulam at the age of 12, and then he comes home at the age of 24. So his father sees that he is somewhat arrogant in his behavior. And he has got the arrogance that he has now mastered the Vedas, and somehow that he has got some arrogance there, which the father wants to deflate his arrogance. And so he asks him, have you gained, you've studied now in the Gurukulam for so long, have you gained that knowledge knowing which everything is as well known? And he says, instead of saying that I don't know that, he says, I think the teacher didn't know that. So then he tells that, is there such a thing, knowing which everything is as well known? And therefore here his father is Uddalaka and the Shishya is Shvetaketu. And then the father becomes a guru here. Uddalaka becomes the guru for Shvetaketu, who then becomes a Shishya. And he teaches him that yes, indeed, in anything, in any world, if you know the material cause, then you as well know all the products. And he gives the examples that if you know the clay, then you know all the clay pots, because all the pots are just namarupas of clay. If you know iron, then you know all the instruments that are made of iron, because they are all just products of iron, which is the material cause. Or if you know gold, then you know as well know all the gold ornaments, being namarupas of gold. So similarly here, he points out that everything here is a product. And what was there in the beginning? This is where the famous statement comes, Sadeva Soumya Idam Agre Asi. In the beginning, there was the Sat alone, unqualified Sat, without all of these Namarupas. Brahman alone was there in the beginning. And then from it have emerged this entire universe, and all these Namarupas, they have emerged from Brahman, and therefore Brahman is the final material cause. Therefore, having known Brahman, everything here is as well known. Therefore, this yat jnatva na aparam geyam, nothing else remains to be known, tat brahma iti avadharayet, know that to be Brahman. We'll stop here and continue in the next class. Om Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om.